You have until Friday to repaint that door, Mr. Delaney, or the fines start at $200 a day. That's what Donna Whitfield said to me, standing on my porch with a clipboard pressed to her chest and a smile that never once reached her eyes. What she didn't know was that the color on my door had been there for 11 years, long before she ever bought her house on Birchwood Lane. And somewhere in a shoebox in my garage, I had the photos to prove it. My name is Mark Delaney. I'm 38, I fix HVAC systems for a living, and 3 years ago my wife Casey and I bought a little brick colonial at 214 Birchwood Lane in a subdivision called Fawn Ridge Estates. It's the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are cut in stripes, the mailboxes match, and everybody waves from their driveway even if they don't know your name. We fell in love with the house the second we saw it, especially the front door. A deep weathered sage green, the paint slightly faded from years of Tennessee sun, with brass hardware that had gone soft and warm with age. The previous owners, the Whartons, had lived there for over a decade. When we closed on the house, the listing agent handed us a folder of paperwork, old inspection reports, warranty cards, and a stack of photos the Whartons had taken over the years. Porch parties, Christmas lights, a graduation photo taken right on those front steps. I tossed that folder in a box in the garage and forgot about it completely. That box would end up mattering more than I ever imagined. Fawn Ridge Estates has an HOA, like most neighborhoods built after 2005 seem to. For the first 2 years we lived there, it was practically invisible. Dues were manageable, $60 a month. The board sent out a newsletter about pool hours and nobody bothered us. Then last spring, the HOA held its annual election, and a woman named Donna Whitfield became the new president. Donna had moved into the neighborhood only 14 months earlier, into the big two-story on the corner of Birchwood and Maple. She drove a white Escalade with a vanity plate that read HOA Boss, which should have told me everything I needed to know. Within weeks of taking office, Donna rewrote the community's landscaping guidelines, sent citations to 3 families for mailbox flags in violation of uniformity standards, and had a very public dispute with a retired schoolteacher over the height of her rose bushes. She started patrolling the neighborhood most evenings around 6, driving slow loops past every house with a notepad on her passenger seat, jotting down anything that caught her eye. People started calling her quietly behind closed doors, the sheriff of Fawn Ridge. I laughed about it at first, even joked with Casey that at least our house was boring enough to stay off her radar. I had no idea I'd be her next target, and I had no idea how personally she'd take the color of a door she'd never once mentioned in the 2 years she'd lived 4 houses down from it. It started on a Tuesday morning in April. I was loading my truck for a job when I noticed a bright pink paper tucked under my windshield wiper, HOA letterhead, bold black type. Notice of architectural violation. My stomach dropped before I even finished reading the first line. The notice claimed that my front door was painted an unauthorized, non-compliant color that violated Section 4. 2 of the community's design guidelines, which required all exterior doors to be painted from an approved palette of 6 colors: black, white, navy, hunter green, burgundy, or classic red. My door, according to Donna's letter, was in violation because sage green wasn't on the approved list. I had 10 days to repaint it or face escalating fines starting at $50 a day. I remember standing in my driveway holding that pink paper, genuinely confused, because nothing about my door had changed since the day we moved in. I called the HOA's management office that afternoon and got a woman named Rita on the phone. "Ma'am, this door has looked exactly like this since before we bought the house," I told her. "Doesn't matter," Rita said, not unkindly. "Compliance is retroactive under the current guidelines. If it's not on the approved list, it's a violation regardless of when it was painted." I asked when the guidelines had changed. She hesitated, then said, "The board updated the palette in January. 3 months before the notice landed on my truck. Convenient timing, I thought, for a board president who apparently didn't care for the color green." I decided to handle it the reasonable way first. I emailed Donna directly that same night, polite, factual, explaining that the door predated the new guidelines and asking whether existing homes were grandfathered in, the way most HOAs handle retroactive rule changes. Her response came back 11 minutes later, at 11:47 p.m., which told me she'd been waiting for it. "Mr. Delaney, the guidelines apply to all homes regardless of purchase date. Noncompliance must be corrected within the stated timeframe. Continued disregard will result in escalating fines and, if necessary, a lien placed on the property." A lien over a paint color. I read that sentence 4 times before I set my phone down. Casey wanted to just repaint the door. "It's not worth the fight, Mark," she said over dinner that Thursday. "$50 a day adds up fast." And she was right financially. But something about the whole thing sat wrong with me. The timing of the rule change, the fact that our neighbors 2 doors down still had a burgundy door that had faded to almost the exact same sage-adjacent tone as mine, yet somehow hadn't received a single notice. I mentioned it to my neighbor Ellen while we were both out getting our mail that Saturday. She lowered her voice like we were discussing something illegal. "Donna's headed out for green ever since her ex-husband's new house went green," Ellen said. "I'm serious, ask anyone." I laughed it off at the time, chalked it up to neighborhood gossip, but it planted a seed. If this was personal rather than procedural, there had to be a way to prove it. I didn't paint the door that week. Instead, I started asking questions. And that decision was about to blow the entire thing wide open. The following Monday, a second notice appeared, this one taped directly to my front door instead of tucked under my wiper, a more aggressive move and clearly a message. The fine had jumped from $50 a day to $200, retroactive to the original 10-day deadline, which meant I already owed $600 and the number was climbing daily. Attached was a formal letter on letterhead from a law firm, Whitfield and Cross Property Management Consulting, which I later learned was not affiliated with any bar-licensed attorney, but rather a compliance service Donna herself had hired, using her own last name, a detail that would matter enormously later. That Wednesday, Donna showed up in person. I was in the driveway changing the oil in Casey's car when her Escalade rolled up and parked crooked across 2 mailboxes. She walked up in workout leggings and sunglasses pushed onto her head, clipboard in hand like some kind of badge. "You have until Friday to repaint that door, Mr. Delaney, or the fines start at $200 a day," she said, the exact words that would end up opening this whole story. I wiped my hands on a rag and asked her calmly why our neighbors at 220 hadn't received a notice for their nearly identical faded burgundy door. Donna's jaw tightened. "That's not the same shade," she said. "I've looked at it personally." I asked if there was an official color matching process, a Pantone reference, anything documented. She said, "I don't need a paint chip to know what I'm looking at." That answer stuck with me, because it meant the entire enforcement process was running on Donna's personal opinion, not any actual documented standard. I decided right there in my driveway that I wasn't repainting anything until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I went out to the garage looking for the box of old paperwork from the Whartons, the one I'd tossed aside and forgotten 3 years earlier. I don't know exactly why I thought of it then, maybe desperation, maybe instinct. I dug through moving boxes for almost an hour before I found it. A battered manila folder held together with a rubber band that snapped the second I touched it. Inside were inspection reports, warranty slips for the water heater, a stack of old photographs printed at a drugstore, the timestamp still visible in orange ink along the bottom edge. I started flipping through them at my kitchen table, and then I stopped cold on one photo in particular. It showed the Wharton's daughter on the front porch in a graduation gown, cap in hand, grinning at the camera, standing directly in front of our front door. The same sage green door. The timestamp in the corner read a date nearly 9 years earlier. 9 years. Not just before Donna's new guidelines took effect in January. Not just before we bought the house 3 years ago, but 9 full years of documented, photographed history proving this door had been this exact color long before any approved palette existed in Fawn Ridge Estates. I sat at that table at 1 in the morning with my heart pounding because I finally understood something crucial. Donna's guidelines, as written, only applied going forward from their adoption date, according to the HOA's own governing documents, which I pulled up online that same night. Section 9. One of the community's CC&Rs stated explicitly that architectural elements existing prior to the adoption of a new design guideline were considered legally nonconforming and grandfathered in, unless the homeowner made a subsequent modification. I hadn't repainted a single thing. Donna either didn't know her own governing documents, or she was counting on the fact that I didn't. I spent the next 2 days building a file. I scanned the graduation photo along with 3 others showing the same door across different seasons and years. I pulled the full CC&R document from the county recorder's office website, where HOA governing documents are legally required to be filed. I highlighted Section 9(1) in yellow. I printed the original notice, the fine escalation letter, and Donna's email admitting she used personal judgment instead of a documented color standard. Casey watched me lay it all out across our dining room table and said, "You're not just fixing this, are you?" I told her no. I was done being told what to do about a door that was never a violation in the first place. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, open to all residents, and I intended to be there. The meeting was held in the clubhouse behind the community pool, folding chairs arranged in rows. A card table up front where Donna sat flanked by two other board members, a treasurer named Phil and a secretary named Grace who mostly stared at her phone. About 20 residents had shown up. More than usual, word had apparently spread about the door lady, as some neighbors had started calling me with a laugh. When the floor opened for resident concerns, I stood up, walked to the front, and set my folder down on the card table. "I'd like to address the architectural violation notice for 214 Birchwood Lane," I said. Donna's expression flickered, that same tight smile from my driveway. "Mr. Delaney, that matter is not up for public debate. Fines are a management decision." I told her I disagreed and that I had documentation the board needed to see. I laid out the graduation photo first, sliding it across the table so Phil and Grace could see it clearly. "This is my front door," I said, "photographed 9 years ago at a graduation party for the previous owner's daughter. Same color, same door, same hardware." Donna glanced at it and said, "Photos can be from anywhere." I expected that, so I pulled out the second document, a dated appraisal report from the county assessor's office, filed 6 years earlier, which included an exterior photo of the home for tax record purposes. Same sage green door, timestamped, government filed, impossible to fake or misdate. The room went quiet. Grace actually looked up from her phone. Then I pulled out the CC and RS, the pages still warm from my printer, corners tabbed with yellow sticky flags. Section 9. 1, I read aloud, states that architectural features existing prior to a guideline's adoption date are legally nonconforming and exempt from retroactive enforcement unless subsequently altered by the homeowner. I looked directly at Donna. "The guidelines changed in January. This door hasn't been touched in over 9 years. According to your own governing documents, this was never a violation." Phil, the treasurer, leaned over and actually read the section himself, his eyebrows lifting. "She's right," he said quietly, loud enough for the room to hear. "This is grandfathered." Donna's face went pale, then red, 2 blotches rising high on her cheeks. "I wasn't aware of that provision," she said, which was, frankly, hard to believe from someone who'd been fining people for 2 months straight. "Then maybe," the retired schoolteacher called out from the back row, "you shouldn't be the one deciding what counts as a violation." A ripple of laughter went through the folding chairs. Donna's knuckles went white around her clipboard. I wasn't finished. I brought up her email. The one admitting she'd judged the color personally, without any Pantone reference or documented comparison process, and pointed out that the compliance letterhead Whitfield and Cross used her own last name for a supposedly independent legal service, something Phil clearly hadn't known either. Based on the way his jaw dropped, a neighbor near the back, the retired schoolteacher who'd had her own run-in over rose bushes, started clapping, slow at first, then a few others joined in. Donna sat there gripping her clipboard, saying nothing, while Phil quietly made a motion to review all architectural violations issued in the past 90 days for similar retroactive enforcement errors. It passed unanimously, 4 votes to 0. Donna didn't even raise her hand. 2 days later, an email arrived from the HOA's official management portal. Not from Donna, from Phil directly. The violation against 214 Birchwood Lane had been formally rescinded. The accumulated fines, which had climbed past $1,000 by then, were wiped from our account entirely, and the board had opened an internal review into Whitfield and Cross Property Management Consulting and its relationship to the board president. By the following week, 3 other families who'd received similar retroactive notices, including the Rosebush teacher, had their fines dismissed too, once residents realized the same non-conforming use clause applied to plenty of other violations Donna had invented out of thin air. Donna resigned from the board 11 days after that meeting, citing personal reasons in a 2-line email that nobody in the neighborhood believed for a second. She put her house up for sale 6 weeks later, and I heard through Ellen that she'd moved to a neighborhood 2 towns over, one without an HOA at all, which struck me as almost poetic. Phil stepped in as interim president, and one of his first actions was hiring an actual licensed HOA compliance attorney instead of letting any single board member define violations off the top of their head. The approved paint palette got revised too, expanded, more reasonable and explicitly non-retroactive going forward, written into the bylaws in black and white so no future board president could pull the same move twice. The Rosebush teacher sent me a bottle of wine with a sticky note that just said "Thank you for the receipts." I still have that note stuck to my refrigerator. As for our door, it's still sage green. Still faded exactly the way it was the day we moved in. exactly the way it looked in a photograph taken at a stranger's graduation party 9 years before I ever lived there. Sometimes Casey and I joke that our front door has more legal documentation behind it than our actual mortgage does. We even framed a copy of that graduation photo and hung it in the entryway, right next to the door itself, half as a joke and half as a reminder. But honestly, what stuck with me most wasn't the money we saved, or even watching Donna's face go pale in that clubhouse. It was realizing how close I came to just repainting it, to just paying the fine, to just letting someone else's personal opinion overwrite 9 years of documented truth simply because fighting felt like more trouble than it was worth. It wasn't. Most people don't fight these things, not because they're wrong, but because HOA boards count on exhaustion. They count on you deciding it's easier to just repaint the door, pay the $50, sign whatever they put in front of you, and move on with your life. Sometimes that math is right, but sometimes all it takes is one box in the garage you almost threw away. If you're dealing with something similar right now, some notice on your windshield, some rule that seems to have appeared out of nowhere, do yourself a favor and dig through that box before you dig into your wallet. Pull your governing documents. Read the fine print nobody reads. You might already be holding the proof you need, and you might not even know it yet. If this story hit home for you, or if your own HOA has ever pulled something just as ridiculous, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if you want more stories like this one, you already know exactly what to do.